I grew up in a Christian home, but Sabbath was not a familiar practice for me. Going to church each Sunday, it was of most importance in my family. If there was ever a scheduling conflict between my sports and church, I had no confusion as to what would take priority. So Sundays being for church was a given, but the practice of Sabbath, a 24-hour time period to intentionally stop, rest, delight, and worship, it wasn't really a reality. Bible college was when I became more familiar with the practice of Sabbath, but it still wasn't something I intentionally implemented into my life. I mean, I was a full-time student and an RA and working a part-time job and volunteered at my church, so Sabbath was something I could figure out after college when life wouldn't be quite so busy. After I graduated, I got married and moved up here to the Bay Area. And a couple years later, started working full-time at Cornerstone Livermore as the middle school pastor. I'm in my mid-20s, I didn't have any kids, and I loved my job. So it was really, really easy for me to work a lot. Days and nights, weekdays and weekends, the lines between work life and home life were almost non-existent. And it wasn't until I had my first kid that I realized I probably needed to change. Boundaries would be good. So about 7 years ago, I became resolute in setting aside Friday night to Saturday night as my Sabbath. After some time, I got pretty good at not checking work emails or doing sermon prep on my Sabbath. I even wouldn't answer texts or phone calls that were work-related. And although I set a boundary of having one day off from my job each week, my Sabbath was still full of work. It was the day that I would clean the house or get caught up on laundry or do yard work, the day I was running errands and grocery shopping, meal planning for the week ahead. And every so often, I'd have a Saturday where I just didn't have the energy or mental capacity or desire to do any of those things. And so instead, I would fill my Sabbath by binging a show or spending hours with my face in front of my phone. But rather than experiencing a day of rest, it was more often a day of restlessness. Maybe you can relate. Today is part 2 of 4 in the series on the spiritual practice of Sabbath, where we are looking at 4 different meanings to the Hebrew word Shabbat, 4 movements for the practice of Sabbath: stop, rest, delight, and worship. And on the docket for today is the second movement, rest. Now, when I hear the word rest, the first thing I think of is sleep. Maybe that's because I'm a mom of young kids and sleep is my most prized possession in life, and more often than I'd like, the most elusive. When I think of rest, I think of something physical, right? Sleep, downtime, relaxing. But the idea behind this verb, Sabbath, it's far more than that. It's not just a physical rest, but holistic rest. Or as we looked at in part 1, what Jesus called rest for your souls, for your whole person. Mental, emotional, spiritual rest as well. Doesn't that sound amazing? I mean, as wonderful as that would be, if we're honest, I think most of us would agree that it also seems pretty impossible. That kind of whole person, every part of me type of rest seems so far out of my reach in our society that is dominated not by rest, but by restlessness. Restlessness, it's an ancient problem, right? Rooted in human nature, but boy, is it magnified in our society today. It's been manipulated by the culture of consumerism in the West and our ever-growing desire for, and I would even say obsession or idolization of more. I mean, take advertising, for example, which is basically an attempt to monetize our restlessness, right? We see upwards of 4,000 ads a day. All of it is intentionally designed to leave you and I feeling unsatisfied and wanting more. And it works. I mean, we fall for the old carrot on the stick routine, chasing more money, more clothes, more things, more square feet, more experiences, more stamps on our passport, more. more. But it's never, ever enough. The moment we get that new thing, a newer thing comes out, right? The moment we achieve what we want, our desire shifts to something else or something more. So when we think of a Sabbath rest, it's not simply a day where we stop, but it's a day where we actually wage war against the restlessness of our age, and instead take on the easy yoke of Jesus, our teacher, who shows us the way to find true rest for our souls. To unpack this thought further, let me Bible nerd out on you for a few minutes. Turn over to Deuteronomy chapter 5. You may or may not know that the 10 Commandments, in which we find this practice of Sabbath given, are recorded twice in Scripture. The first is in Exodus 20. That's one of the passages we looked at during part 1 of this series. And the second is given 40 years later here in Deuteronomy 5. Which means this account in Deuteronomy, it's written to the next generation, to those who were unborn or maybe still babies during the Exodus, when the Israelites first left their life of slavery in Egypt. So let's take a look together at how this Sabbath command is given to this next generation. Deuteronomy 5, starting in verse 12. Observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Okay, now there are two differences between the Sabbath command in Exodus 20 and the one given here in Deuteronomy 5. The first is minor. In Exodus, it says, remember the Sabbath, and here in Deuteronomy, it says, observe the Sabbath. The Hebrew word for observe is shamar. It means to keep watch over or to guard. Think of it like how we observe a holiday, such as Christmas or Easter, right? We guard it, we watch over it to make it special and unique. We have certain traditions, events, and activities that we reserve for those holidays that keep them set apart from any other day of the year. And that's the idea with Sabbath. It's like a weekly holiday. We're to keep watch over it and not let it become just another ordinary day of the week. Observe the Sabbath. That's change number 1. And the rest of the command is pretty verbatim to Exodus 20 until the end, where we see the second change, and it's a major one. You see, in Exodus, the rationale for the Sabbath is grounded in the story of creation. For in 6 days, the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that's in them, but he rested on the 7th day. However, here in Deuteronomy, the rationale for Sabbath is grounded in liberation. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. In Exodus, Sabbath is about rhythm. In Deuteronomy, Sabbath is about resistance. Give me a few more minutes to kind of lay this out even further. In the Exodus story, when the people of Israel are still in bondage in Egypt, there's all sorts of language about restlessness. Take Exodus 5, for example. Here are some of what Pharaoh said regarding the Israelites who he enslaved. Why are you taking the people away from their labor? Get back to your work. Make the work harder for the people so that they keep working. Lazy, that's what you are, lazy. That's why you keep saying, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Now get to work. You will not be given any straw, yet you must produce your full quota of bricks. You see, in the story, Pharaoh is a cruel tyrant. No matter how hard the Hebrews worked, it was never enough. They live under the oppressive yoke of the daily quota. Work more, do more, produce more. Slaves don't get a Sabbath. a day of rest. In an empire like that, slaves are subhuman, a commodity. They only have value in what they produce. They work all day, every day, until they die. And what was all of this work, this restlessness in pursuit of? More. Israel was making bricks to build supply cities, entire cities, just to store all of Pharaoh's extra stuff. Rest in the story for the people of Israel, it's a byproduct of the salvation and the deliverance of God. Remember, you're not a slave anymore. You're in a new kingdom under a new king. Our God is nothing like Pharaoh. And don't forget, Deuteronomy 5 was written to the next generation. So it's remember you're not a slave anymore, and remember to never become a slave driver yourself. Hence the command about male and female servants, the foreigner, even animals, all are equal and under the Sabbath. All get to rest. Theologian A.J. Swoboda calls the Sabbath scheduled social justice, where it's this intentional pausing one day out of every week to submit ourselves to the way that God designed life to be, that all have equality and freedom and peace in God. And we need this practice now more than ever before because Pharaoh and Egypt are alive and well. In the literary design of the Bible, Egypt is an archetype. Similar to Babylon and the Roman Empire later on, it was a real historical nation state, an empire, but it's also symbolic of all the empires down through time and all across the world. Even though we're a 21st century Westerners and not ancient Hebrews living in Egypt, still we live in a modern day Egypt, in a culture of restlessness, in a culture that places high demand, high value on more. And I would say specifically more accomplishment and more accumulation. I mean, think about it. Decades ago, people saw the invention of things like the dishwasher, the computer, microwave, washers, and dryers, and thought, man, these time-saving technologies, they're going to allow us to move from 40-hour work weeks to 30-hour work weeks. And they imagined by the time we got to our current point in history, we all would be like George Jetson, right? Work is just a minuscule portion of our life that is primarily defined by rest and leisure. But here we are, 2023, and we aren't working less, right? We're working more, just in different ways. With things like smartphones, business messaging apps, other communication platforms, the lines between work and home are more blurred than ever before. And there are absolute pros to this flexibility that all of that advancement provides. Like as a working mom, the fact that I can stay home with a sick kid and still engage with work, not have to take the full day off, it's a huge blessing. But if we aren't careful, if we aren't intentional, the cons of those blurred lines can easily take over and even enslave us. We work more than ever before, accomplishment, but we also have more than ever before, accumulation. Let me give you some astonishing stats. We now spend 2 to 3 times more on goods and services than our ancestors did in the 1940s. Our homes now are 3 times larger and full of twice as many things. I mean, the average home in America, not rich, just average, has over 300,000 items in it. We might not have supply cities like ancient Egypt, but there are 2.3 billion square feet of self-storage space in America. That's 7.3 square feet for every person in our nation. Meanwhile, many people all around us, hiding in plain sight, some who are a part of our church family here at Cornerstone Fellowship are barely able to make rent, to put food on the table. Even in the midst of all of this desire for more, we are unhappier than ever before. Sociologists tell us that the happiness levels in the West, it hit a peak in the 1950s, and they've been in a steady decline ever since. We work more than ever before, we have more than ever before, and we're still not happy. It's Egypt all over again. And it's so easy to get sucked into this culture. we feel like we have to work those extra hours to get ahead, right? We have to reach a certain standard of living. We have to own this or that. We have to participate in this or that. It's just so easy to say, well, that's just how it is. My oldest son is 7, and he loves sports. And we love that he loves sports. It's so fun to watch him play and watch his confidence grow, and he's good. But Garen and I, we made a decision that we were only putting him in one sport at a time. And so when he finished fall rec soccer, which is my favorite sport and which is his favorite sport, and he did amazing and he made the all-star team and he was invited to do the spring program for soccer, we said no, because we already registered him for baseball in the spring. And I remember talking to another parent whose son is on Hudson's baseball team, and his son was also invited to play spring soccer, to which they said yes, as well as saying yes to flag football. And so when he asked me if Hudson was doing both baseball and soccer, and I replied with, no, he's not, he was shocked. Because the assumption in our culture is if you can, you should, right? If he wants to play both sports, a good parent would let him do both. What if I stifle his interest or suppress his talent? More accomplishment, more accumulation, more. Isn't this just how it is? But church, it doesn't have to be this way. Listen carefully. Rest is an act of resistance. Rest is an act of resistance. It's an act of defiance against Pharaoh and his empire. It's a way of saying with our whole lives, our whole being, enough. Enough work. Work is a good thing. We were created for work, but it is not the thing. Enough stuff. Stuff isn't bad, but most of us have more than enough. Sabbath rest is a way to resist our idols in the West of accomplishment and accumulation. A way to push back on the restlessness in our society, the notion that we have to do more, make more, have more, because our identity, our worth, our status is found in those things. But let me tell you, God says, no, you don't. Our identity and our worth are found in who created us and who loves us, not in what we do and what we have. We don't have to produce or perform or purchase our way into love. We are already accepted, already valuable, already loved. Sabbath rest is an act of resistance. And this sounds nice and beautiful. But what it also means is that when we practice Sabbath, we are going to feel resistance. Both external resistance, right? The culture all around us, it's a restless, rhythmless, hollow out your soul and suck you dry culture. To Sabbath well, it will require intentionality, preparation, and a resolute determination to go against the flow of the cultural tide, to live differently. This is not easy. But there's also internal resistance. Egypt isn't just around us, it's in us. To Sabbath, to come to rest, we have to resist the internal dynamics of restlessness in our own fallen heart. Greed, envy, jealousy, discontentment, anxiety, a controlling spirit, addiction. Pastor Adele Calhoun says, if you aren't resting, you're a slave to something. If you aren't resting, you're a slave to something. Could we all take some time this week to self-reflect and ask, what is keeping me from rest? Maybe it's something external or it's something internal. But what is keeping me from rest? And does it have a stronger hold on me than I realize? I want to close with 3 things that will help us learn to rest and resist. And all of these things involve intentional planning and forethought. The first is to prepare for the day. When it comes to Sabbath, there has to be intentionality. In the Bible, the day before the Sabbath is called the preparation day. This is when all of the food is prepared, the cooking, the cleaning is done. Things that need to get done prior to Sabbath are accomplished on the preparation day. That way, when Sabbath arrived, they could be fully present. no longer focused on doing, but on being. And we really need this preparation time too. If not a day, at least a few hours. Maybe the afternoon before or the night before, the day before. You prepare because Sabbath will not just happen. It's too countercultural. If we let the inertia of the day carry us, we'll just get sucked right back into the cultural current. So set aside some time and prep. Go grocery shopping, clean or do laundry, run your errands. It's planning out what you're not going to do on the Sabbath, but it's also planning what you are going to do on the Sabbath. Plan out the things that are restful and life-giving for you to do on Sabbath. It could be doing something outdoors or having friends over for a meal or intentionally planning a family activity to do together. For me, Sabbath is restful when we can have a slow morning, because most mornings are busy around my house. Garrett leaves for work before I do Monday through Friday, and I leave before work because he doesn't go to work on Sundays. And so most days during the week, he'll get the boys started with breakfast, but then I'm making lunch and packing snacks and getting them dressed and ready for the day because Garrett's already left. And so on Sabbath, we stay in our pajamas longer than we usually would. We make pancakes together. And my 4-year-old insists on cracking the eggs himself. So then we retrieve the shell pieces from the bowl together. And when we're feeling really wild, we make homemade whipped cream for the pancakes and just enjoy the slower pace and time together. What would some of those things be for you? Think about them. Talk about them with the people you live with. Take time to prepare and plan out the things that bring you rest instead of the things that increase your restlessness. So that's the first thing, prepare for Sabbath. The second thing is to prepare for external resistance. This could be those societal pressures we've already talked about to work more, have more, experience more, be more, right? Always be going and producing and striving. But external resistance could also come from things like our phone, social media, shopping, right? Consumerism, TV shows. Those external things we turn to for entertainment when we're bored, when we have downtime, but they are really things that often lead to us feeling more numb or more drained instead of things that allow us to be filled up, to experience life and true rest. Another way we may experience external resistance to Sabbath is through people. Whether it's the coworker that doesn't respect your out of office, the friend or family who view Sabbath as a weird thing, or just simply those pressures from others to fill our schedule so packed full that rest simply isn't even an option. And the third thing we can do is prepare for internal resistance. And this is the one that's hardest for me because I'm someone who thrives off of accomplishment, completing a task, finishing a to-do list, working hard, always moving, always doing. And as much as I know Sabbath is a good thing and a necessary thing for me to not burn out, as much as I desire to Sabbath, I'm usually met with lots of internal resistance to it. Because Sabbath pushes against these deeper internal dynamics that are at play in me. Like this internal dialogue I have that I am what I do. My identity comes from my job or my work or what I accomplish or what I produce. My sense of value, my worth come from those things. Or another internal dialogue for me is that my environment needs to be perfect in order for it to be good. And so there's times when I can't enjoy rest or downtime because my house is not the way I need it to be, or my kids are not the way I need them to be, or my life feels like it's not the way I need it to be. And in those moments, Sabbath, pursuing rest, feels almost impossible because of the internal resistance that I'm facing when I stop, when I slow, when I try to pursue that rest. And there's also a thing called Sabbath sadness. Sometimes Sabbath is a day where I feel an increase of sorrow. an increase of anxiety, even an increase of pain, because it's the day that I come face to face with all the things I was trying to ignore throughout the week by just staying busy. Right? If I don't have to stop, I won't have to think about it or deal with it. But we all know that's not true. Sabbath is a time we identify that internal resistance we may be experiencing or feeling, and we surrender it, allowing the Holy Spirit to meet us in the midst of whatever we're feeling and bring about healing and true rest. In the Sabbath companion guide that we're using to dive deeper into this series throughout the week, which that guide can be found on our webpage for the series, cornerstoneweb.org/Sabbath. In that companion guide, there's a journaling prayer exercise for this week, the week on rest. And it focuses primarily on two questions. What am I feeling? And then what attachment is under that feeling? And this is such a helpful exercise to help us begin to identify those areas of internal resistance that each of us have. My encouragement to all of us is to set aside a time on Sabbath, whether you're going to practice Sabbath for a whole day this week or maybe just a small portion of a day. Set aside some time to go through that journaling prayer exercise and see what the Holy Spirit brings to light for you. Author Ruth Haley Barton says, to practice Sabbath, we need to know what we are in bondage to, what has us in its grip. And that is precisely the thing we should cease. We need to know what wears us out and what wears us down, what robs us of our joy and peace, and cease that, because that is exactly what God wants to free us from. Prepare for the day, prepare for external resistance, and prepare for internal resistance. I'll close with this. If you're feeling a little overwhelmed right now with all of this, it's okay. For some of us, Sabbath may be a part of our regular rhythm, but I imagine for the majority of us, the practice of Sabbath feels like the complete opposite of our daily life, that it feels impossible to actually implement on a consistent basis. Some of you are like me and you have young kids who dictate so much of not only your daily schedule, but the pace and the restfulness or lack thereof of your home. Others of you are primary caregivers for an older child with special needs or an aging parent. Some of you are single parents, or you're working a demanding 60, 70, 80 hours a week job, or working multiple jobs just to try to make ends meet. Some of you are full-time students, or you're commuting multiple hours every single day, and there's countless other things I could name. So please hear me when I say that our hope with this series is not to induce guilt in you or shame or even create one more thing to add to your to-do list. It is important to offer yourself lots and lots and lots of grace as you start to pray about and implement what a regular rhythm of Sabbath could look like for you. Sabbath, it has been a several years long journey for me, and I by no means have it figured out yet. But what I do know is that the more I experience Sabbath, the more I desire it. Because I'm noticing that it is transforming me. It's helping me slow down in a really good way. It's helping me loosen my need for control. It's allowing me space to be more content with my life as it is and not as I want it to be. It's giving me the ability to be more present to the ways God is at work in my life, to notice them. It's allowing me to be more present to what's going on within me, what I'm feeling, what I'm wrestling with, more present to those around me. I'm noticing that the weeks I Sabbath well, right? And by Sabbath well, I'm not saying I just took a day off and I just like vegged out. No, the weeks where I'm pursuing, intentionally stopping and resting and pursuing deep connection with God and with myself and with others, those weeks when I Sabbath well, that overflows, it bleeds into it, it impacts who I am the other 6 days of the week. See, Sabbath isn't just for that seventh day, it impacts all my days. And the reason I feel so strongly about spending an entire month focusing on the topic of Sabbath as a church is because I believe these things can be true for all of us as well. It's going to take time. It's going to take preparation and intentionality. It'll be a process as you figure out what are those things that are keeping you in bondage to that restlessness. What are the things that give you life and give you rest? It's going to be unique to all of us. There's so much around us that we'll have to lean into and resist because it pushes against what Sabbath is. But as we lean in, as we talk with God and with our community about what this could look like in each of our lives, I believe God will meet us right where we are and provide us with exactly what we need to rest. And so that's precisely the prayer I want to pray over you to close. My prayer is this: may the God of rest fill you with his presence and peace as you rest in him.
Wait, before you go, 3 things. First, please consider becoming one of Cornerstone Fellowship's financial partners. Your donations will ensure that you'll be able to continue enjoying helpful and hopefully life-changing messages like the one you just watched. And number 2, please share the link to this message with anyone who you know needs it or will be blessed by it, or post the link to your own personal social platforms. And finally, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you'll be alerted whenever we post more content. Thanks for watching.